There it is. It says we're preparing. All right, it's 5 o'clock, and we are live on the weekly call to action here at Corner Fringe Ministries. My name is Mike Sutcliffe, and I'm one of the pastors here at Corner Fringe. And this week we have our guest Ray Hansen joining us to discuss Jason Berry's message from last weekend. If you didn't get a chance to watch the message, it is on the YouTube channel, and really we just want to talk today a little bit about what it means or what can possibly happen when anyone, it doesn't have to be somebody of great knowledge, wisdom, or even resource, anyone is willing to say, here I am, Lord. So I'm pretty excited about learning and sharing with Ray today with all of you. So how are you doing today, Ray?
Well, I'm slightly overweight and a little bit insecure, but happy to be here. Glad from the shoulders up.
You know what? I feel the exact same way. So yeah, we're brothers of another mother. That's all. So I feel the same way. I'm like, if I can get the camera to lose 20 pounds, I would feel a lot better.
I know.
Yeah, gotta love it. So we had a chance to, Craig's not going to be with us today. He's doing some youth event. We already know about that. So we had a chance last week to listen to Jason Berry of Anoka Community mission up there in Minnesota, which is near you or within your state. And, you know, I always find when I listen to men like that talk, it gets a little overwhelming for me because I think, wow, that's pretty incredible. I could never do something like that. And so when we were talking about this and we had our conversation the other day, really, it was just to me, the thing that jumped out about Jason is he just said, here I am.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, it's basically just, it's a really good depiction of giving yourself completely over to the care of the Lord and just saying, do with me thou what you will. You know, and, you know, I kind of wish I would have heard more about that, like the beginning side of it.
Right.
Because that's, I mean, I think obviously you and I have talked a little bit already, but I mean, that's an important thing, right? Like, how do I identify the voice of God? How do I come to discernment with it? And then do I have the faith to step out in faith and actually maybe witness a miracle, give God the opportunity, you know?
Right. Yeah. You know, I was thinking about, well, now that you're saying that, it's kind of putting different stories into my head. I remember when my father-in-law was telling me his testimony about how he got saved. And the one thing he said when he got saved was, Lord, don't send me to Africa. Like, it was literally the one, he'll do anything else, but please don't send me to Africa. And it's now, you know, and I don't think he's been to Africa. He's been to Haiti a couple of times. But you know, my wife and I have been there. I know one of his daughters has traveled extensively all over the world for another ministry. And so maybe he caught a break there. We don't always get to say to the Lord, okay, here's what I'm willing to do and here's what I'm not willing to do. This here I am philosophy really is about putting yourself in a place of vulnerability and submission, I think.
Yeah, I mean, what's a better way to say I love you and I trust you? You know?
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. So can you think of a time when you might have said, here I am, like in your life, you know, how does that look? Let's see if we can help ourselves get to the point of understanding how we hear God speak and how we can respond the right way when he does that. So let's start with the here I am. You got a here I am story?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I've come at the whole faith thing, I think, from the perspective of I was beaten into it.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like I was forced to give my life completely over to the care of the Lord because it was going to cost me my life. The way I lived my life was going to kill me. And I just didn't have much to stand on. My way wasn't working. Okay. So in that sense, I think I was very lucky, but I still didn't know what the heck to do. Like my biggest thing was, okay, I'll give this God thing a try, but I'm not, you know, I really looked at it as the floating carpet Hindu, you know, light candles and chant. Like I thought the same people that would follow Christ are the same people that followed Hitler.
Okay.
Like, just weak-minded, couldn't think for themselves, didn't have any drive. So I just, it was hard for me to be open to the idea of a loving and caring father that was all powerful, because I didn't see a lot of love in my world.
Okay.
And then when I got open to it, it was really just, I committed to a guy who seemed like he felt like I felt, but lived differently. Like I said, if I could think and believe the way he thinks and believe, if he can do it, I might be able to do it.
Okay.
And my first step into that was just, I'll do whatever you tell me. I'll follow every direction you give me. So if you tell me to pray, I'll pray. I don't know if I'll pray wholeheartedly and thinking that it's even do a thing, but I'll say the words.
Okay.
And the great thing I gave God that much, and he kicked the door down. And I think I shared in another testimony with you when I went from needing God to wanting God. And then it was just drinking from a but the one thing my sponsor told me at that time, which I loved, he said, you might not have a clue what God's will is, but you know very well what God's will isn't. So you have half of the information.
I like it. Your sponsor was so wise. I really appreciate all those little, you should write a book with all the sponsors' little isms, right? That's a good one.
Well, I'm so glad too. It all came from somebody else. It wasn't my own best thinking.
There you go.
It's all played.
My story was slightly, I don't know, there's similarities, but I think there's a lot of differences. So for example, I did think very similar to you in the idea that those who professed Christ, I actually just thought they were hypocrites or foolish, or, I didn't have a high view of people who went to church. I felt very judged by them. And I had done a lot of things in my life to get me to a point where I guess I never really thought that I would be. I had a good job. I had been through, I had some authority. I had influence. All the things that most men desire, I was experiencing. But then I went through a period where I lost everything, it became clear that everything that I thought I had was really just like, it was fake. It wasn't real. I didn't really have authority or influence. People that I thought were friends weren't really friends. I had a marriage that fell apart. I had children that were a train wreck. And then it came to the point where I realized that I was the cause of 90% of it. Like I could blame anyone else, but it was my own mistake. So I think for me, I got to that point where I fell on my knees fortunately, there was a pastor who I always look back and say, if he wasn't available, where would I be? Right. So he was a guy who said, here I am. And he was available for me. And when I fell on my knees, to this day, I remember just the one deal that I made with God. It wasn't like my father-in-law's. My deal was, whatever, I will do anything you want me to do. I had come to the point in my life where I guess I figured out I didn't know anything. Like everything I knew was wrong, kind of like what your sponsor said about like, you may not know the voice of the Lord, but you know what isn't the voice. And I had become really good at determining all the bad things to do. And so now I wanted to be a blank slate, and I was willing to do whatever. And so for me, that might've been, my salvation story is my here I am moment. And then it wasn't until a few months later when the pastor said, hey, maybe you should go into ministry. And I was like, what are you talking about? Yeah. We're not talking about that. I was talking about like, tithing, we're going to church. I wasn't really thinking about doing all the things that I get to do today that I can't even believe I get to do. So, we both started at different angles, but we come to the same point. And that point begins when we recognize Christ for who he is, right?
Yeah. And recognizing, kind of like we talked about in the bitterness one, where when I get full of bitterness and all this, I tell God basically to get off his throne, and I want to be the judge, juror, and executioner for a day. You know what I mean? Like, so I think when we start to realize like we have no business on this throne because of our rotten fruit, then we're open to the Lord, right? Like,
Mm-hmm.
and it's
Yeah.
amazing what God can do with a sliver of willingness.
Yeah. I think it's interesting. If Craig were here, we would be reminding him that during Sukkot, him and Heather put together a devotional for the church, and it was Hineni, or Here I Am. And it was just this week-long study that we did about being available to the Lord. And I really thought about that a lot after I listened to Jason's message about that. So we've got this point of here I am. So now let's talk to people who are like, okay, I'm willing. I want to do whatever the Lord wants me to do. What are some ways? And this is probably the question that you originally started with. How do we know what God wants us to do? How do we know what his will is?
Well, I mean, I think the first thing to do is to go seek counsel, or at least for me, like I have to talk to people that I respect their walk with Yeshua.
Got it.
Right. And then I think this is biblical, right? The testimony of 2 or 3. If you bring enough people that you trust and you get 2 or 3 people to sign off on it, you can pretty much act as if it's gospel. You know what I mean? You can have that transition from faith to belief.
Right.
So
yeah, that goes back to that Proverbs 24 about there's this security in the wisdom of counselors, right? That's kind of a benefit. Like, and usually it's somebody that has been down that path ahead of me. Like your sponsor might be a great example. Like I always learn from somebody who's done it. Now I always learn the hard way. I'm difficult like that. So I need to have somebody who's patient enough to go, okay, no, Mike, that's completely wrong, right? Poor Craig, he's got to walk with me through a lot of things that we're doing here. But when I'm listening to him talk a lot of times, and I'm bringing up stuff, you know, he's still helping me in this role here at Corner Fringe. But I do now, and now I've got you in this little circle of people that I allow to influence me and to speak truth into my life, which really it can't be easy for everyone. But yeah, to your point, it's that scripture of there's safety and security in the counsel of many. So that's a good idea. What else comes to mind when you think about, like, how do you know it's Jesus talking?
I mean, there's a few things, right? Like I don't ever want to put Yeshua in too much of a box, right? Just so that I can define him and feel like I know him better, right? Knowing him and knowing about him are 2 totally different things. But I do know, generally speaking, the hardest part about me identifying the voice of God is he's usually the most quiet and consistent voice. And all the other voices in my head are honestly so much louder. It doesn't matter if I'm angry or excited, ambitious, prideful, a very, melting pot of all the different emotions. And again, that's why I think prayer, it starts with prayer, right? Because I have to go to the source, but then I've got to go to my people so I can quiet all the other voices and hear that quiet voice of God. Because usually, I would say 8 out of 10 times, the voice of God is usually telling me something to do that I'd rather not do. It's not the comfortable, easy, sexy, flashy choice. Mm-hmm. It's usually about myself that requires me to step out from fear into faith, or be willing to be uncomfortable and refined. Like I love that analogy of the refiner's fire, all to actually walk into the fire and actually be burned so that I come out the other side so badly disfigured I resembled nothing of the man I was when I stepped in.
Right.
And that's, again, the here I am. Do I have that level of here I am, Lord? Or do I just be the guy that wants to sit by the fire and just get warm, but never get the transformation,
Wow, that takes a lot. I mean, that's I think there's a lot of that comfort piece is I don't know, I think that's probably the stumbling block, isn't it? Like yeah. I get comfortable. The first time Dora and I went to Malawi in like 2007, we were gone for 2 weeks. And when we came back, I swore I would never take for granted a bed. It didn't take very long.
Yeah.
I'll never take for granted a hot shower. A couple days later, one of my kids took a shower and I didn't get all the hot water and I was back to normal, right? We're so seduced by our comfort that I think that's the part, right? We're deceived into believing that we're serving Lord because we go to church, or I don't know. That seems to be the big one that I see. Well, I go to church and that's good enough for the Lord. But I don't think that that's what he's looking for, because you just mentioned another word, sacrifice.
Yeah, sacrifice and transformation. Yeah.
Yeah. So walk me through, what does sacrifice look like? I mean, because I think if I were sitting here listening to us talk today, I would go, well, does God really expect me to do the Abraham thing, leave my wife and my family and my country and go somewhere? Or can a sacrifice look like something else? What does sacrifice look like to you?
I mean, sacrifice basically, I mean, if to just sum it up real short, would be letting go of something of myself. Like usually it's a desire, it's an entitlement, it's a feeling, right? Like we were talking earlier, and I talked about one of the easiest way to shoot a deer is by cutting trails and tying fences together and making an easier pathway, because they'll always take the easy path. And it's the easiest way to shoot a deer, right? Because they're just going to take the most easiest path. Well, I'm the same way. I have this misconstrued idea of happiness and what a good Christian looks like, where I think that should be, I have peace, I have comfort, and it's like, no. I mean, they even talk about one of the constant things through scripture is the persecution that comes with this. You know what I mean? Right. Like this is not a walk of comfort. This is a walk of discomfort and doing the hard things and refining our character to try and reflect his light more efficiently. Right. So, I mean, a lot of sacrifices, literally, if I'm like when you and I were having the conversation about me and struggling to really join the body of a church, right? Mm-hmm. I know if I really want to find what God's will is for me, I come into it with, where am I getting it wrong and what am I not doing? And that's my attitude, because I know the solution is in the, I don't want to be friendly. I don't want to get to know people. I don't want to hang out late and show up early. I don't even want to rest. But it is those things. It's the difference of like going up to somebody and saying, hey, you know what? If I've ever done anything that hurt you, I just want you to know that was never my intention. And I apologize. I mean, that's great, right? But then when I go up to somebody else and I'm like, hey, you know what? You've gone out of your way to be very welcoming to me. And I've actually been very rude in the way I responded. I've been very closed off and probably gave you the impression that I didn't care. And that wasn't right. I want you to know that what I saw you do, I appreciate. And the way I handled it, the way I discredited your, generosity and outgoingness and your willingness to make me feel included, I was totally disrespectful to that. And that's a reflection on my character, not on yours. Mm. I mean, that's the difference between real godly sorrow and real sacrifice. I could do the right thing, but I could do it half-assed. You know what I mean? Do it the comfortable way.
Right.
Or absolutely. I can do it that God wants me to do it.
Absolutely. I'm thinking through and it goes to the motive, right? So if I'm doing it as an outward thing, then you're going to get an incomplete apology. You're going to get the, what the world says I should apologize. And this happens I see this in every relationship that I have. If my wife and I are having a disagreement and I just want it to end, I'm like, I'm sorry. And and she knows, she can tell right off the bat, like he doesn't mean it, right? And so that fight doesn't end. But if I earnestly want to seek forgiveness, it's always available. Well, I think the same thing's true of the Lord. When we're serving other people, he doesn't want us to do it from a wrong condition, right? So this yes, Lord, can't be a begrudging thing, right? So if we're saying yes to the Lord, it needs to be wholehearted. I think everything I see in scripture, when you read the burnt sacrifices, you look at what Yeshua did on the cross, you look at everything that the disciples paid, it is a complete sacrifice. They left nothing on the table. And that's what I think his expectation is. And for a lot of people, I think that's really hard to put into context when the church, by and large, says you don't have to do all that. He's never going to ask you to do those things. And you said a few minutes ago about not putting him in a box. And I think we've done that. We put him in this really beautiful, perfectly sized, convenient, comfortable box that says, I just pull them out on Saturday or Sunday, whatever day I go to church, and that's the time that I have worship. The rest of the week, it's okay. He doesn't mind, right? So this whole thing about saying yes to him and no to myself is really a bigger deal. And what I like is when you see a guy like Jason, I think I pick up that he has completely said yes to the Lord. Like there's no question. This he's doing it.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. All right, so say we get a guy that you and I are at that point now. We're like, okay, yes, Lord, I'm willing to do whatever you want. And now we're gonna hear the word of the Lord. We're gonna hear the voice. Now, how do we discern the difference? Like, I guess the question that I'm coming to is, does it mean that the only way you can serve the Lord is in ministry, or are there other avenues that people can serve the Lord that is honoring him and doing his will?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because I think one of the things that can be hard to relate to when you hear a talk like on Saturday, like Jason's, is that it is so grand and just so edifying to the Lord that you feel like, well, I can never touch that. I can't relate to it. It seems so big and so grand. It's just, I'm happy for you and praise the Lord. But it's not inspiring to me because it's so far-fetched from my prejudices and my already preconceived ideas of what the Lord wants to do with me.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? But at the end of it, and I love that Jason is so good at just saying everything was the Lord, right? Like, I guarantee it, that wasn't his first moment of stepping out in faith with God. It was a practice that had evolved, right? So I think we start looking like everybody that I come into contact with is part of my ministry. It could be the guy that I'm paying a toll going down the freeway, to the guy I'm buying a cup of coffee from, to the guy that's standing behind me. It's crazy. There's been times where I've been on phone calls with guys and we're talking about God at a coffee shop. And then 20 minutes later, when the guy I'm with, because usually there's another guy there, he'll get up and go to the bathroom and somebody will come over and be like, man, it's just so refreshing to hear two guys talk like this, da, 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 da. And all of a sudden you're talking with a stranger about how you love the Lord, So I think it's more being willing and then just watching what God does. 90% of my life is, how do I stay out of his way? Because he wants to do this stuff more than I want to.
Yeah. What you just described is that whole, we talked about this the other day, that mustard seed faith. And when I studied that, the thing that really, that's been a challenging passage for me, because I've looked at it and gone, I can't move my shoes across the room, let alone a mountain from here to there. And then I looked around and said, well, I also don't see anybody else moving mountains. So something's not right here. But when I did this study on that the other day, what it talked about was not necessarily size as in muscle or mass, but actually in frequency of faith. And you just defined that really well. Like it's the little things, right? Jason did not open up and start Anoka the way it is today, yesterday. I mean, this has been a long project. And when he started, I'm going to guess that he didn't have the vision that it is today or what he has now for the future. But he just faithfully said, here I am. And he took the first step. And so that first step could be as simple as loving your wife better. It could
Yep.
be literally laying down your life for your wife. That could be an experiencing of faith that later on, like your conversation, results in something else. Like, my wife has been through a lot over the last several years with her health. And there was a season about 4 years ago where it was really, really scary for us. I mean, just no doctor could give us answers. And she was going through a really, really hard time. And she had a couple ladies that would come around and pray with her. And even to this day, we still don't know what was wrong with her. She still has little setbacks, but by and large, she's better. What I've noticed, though, is that there are a lot of women in her life who go through mysterious illnesses that need somebody that can walk alongside them through that. And I think it's a lot like this. Like, to me, that's moving a mountain. Like, when you have no hope, when the doctors have no answers, and you just feel like the whole world is like, because that's what happens, right? People like the people that Jason are dealing with, they're not one-time people. They're over and over. I love that he called them friends. They're not guests. They're not visitors. They're friends. And when you have a friend, you're willing to walk for a long period of time with that person through a lot of hardship. And that's what happens. And that's that frequency of faith that we're getting from this. I really like that part.
Yeah, I did too. It's a great thing, because I mean, attitude dictates so much of how well we do a thing, right? Like, remember we were talking about even taking inventory of how I think about people.
Yeah.
And do I think about everybody as if they're God's favorite child, regardless of what they're doing? Because I know God is like, forgive them, for they know not what they do. How much do I live that out? You know?
Absolutely. That's a hard one. No, that's a hard one. So, okay, so we've kind of got a picture now. We've got the idea that first we have to be willing, right? And then after that, we have to discern, because I think, Ray, you're the opposite of me. Like, I'm the guy that's like, I jump off of a ledge, and halfway down, I'm like, oh, I probably should have planned better. You seem like a strategist, right? Like, I'm like, oh, I want to see what the Lord's going to do. Let me jump off this plane and see if there's a parachute halfway down, right? And so it probably drives people crazy in my life. So there's counsel in going, hey, Ray, what do you think I should do, right? So we getting good counsel and experiencing the pain that I think has to go with the growth piece. I love when I think about Abraham, and I think about the man that he was in Genesis, and you go, this is the father of faith. He's kind of a coward. He lied. He's not exactly the most upright type of person, but he said, yes, Lord. And then the Lord shaped his character and transformed him by just following, just following along that path. And then look what he became, the father of faith for us in our belief system. And I think that's pretty cool. So anybody that you can think of, do you have an example or a story about somebody that affected you because they said, yes, here I am?
I mean, yeah, to tell you the truth, I don't think I would have got through my first 2 years of sobriety without walking on the back of giants. I had no faith in humanity and brotherhood. Like, I didn't see that side of life, and I didn't live in that world, and that's part of the reason why I thought God just was a grandiose idea for people that were weak-minded. Because if you did the things I did, hung out with the people I hung out with, and saw what I saw, you would see that there's no way that there's an all-loving and knowingful, powerful God. You're right. But then all of a sudden, I meet these people who are willing to sacrifice time with their family. They're willing to tell me things that they've done in their life that I'm sure that they would rather have just told nobody and taken it to the grave. But they did it because they thought it would be helpful. When I lost my license, because I got, my license suspended for a while, I never missed a meeting. And I was going to meetings 5 days a week. Somebody was always willing to drive out of their way, come pick me up, come drop me off, take me to work. It was just amazing, and those people were doing that because somebody was doing it with them. Right. So, it's like, you just have no idea what God is doing. I mean, I've even went through that with my dad's, brain problems, the traumatic brain injury that he had for those couple of years before he passed away. I was getting super resentful at God because where's the love? Where's the mercy? Take him. Just take him home. But this is my idea of love and mercy. I still think that I have all the information, and it's like, I'll never be able to understand the full working and the full plan that the Lord has. And sometimes that's the hardest part, is me just going, I have to trust it.
Yeah.
Like we talk about, you and I a lot, and Craig, about staying in our lane, knowing our role. I'm a servant. Nobody asks the servants how the leader should lead.
Yeah.
My job is to do, right? So when it comes to it, I really have to use people. I have to be open and invite them into my prayer life, but then also have conversations to be able to hear the audible voice of God, because I've never heard God be like, go south, just never been fortunate enough to say that. And I've always been really nervous to claim to people like, I heard the voice of God. It's like, no, I think I did, and I got to check this out.
Yeah, right.
But yeah,
that's awesome. Well, I think for me, I love your voice of the Lord thing. Next year, we'll have to get you up there instead of John. John did Noah. You can do the voice of God. For me, I would agree 100%. It's almost always something that requires me to be outside of my comfort zone. I think as an American, my culture is a stumbling block. I literally look around the house and go, man, I don't have this, or that needs to get done, or this, I know a lot of people who have it a million times worse than I do. And there's something about people who recognize their own situation that, and I'm talking about true, like when I go to Africa, I'll never forget, we drove through this one town and these kids knocked on the bus window. And of course, you're American. You're like, oh, I'm going to throw money at these kids. They were asking for our empty water bottles because they were going to turn those into dishes.
Wow.
That's all they wanted. They just wanted our trash so that they can run down to the stream and bring the water back up to their home. And I thought, I just don't understand that. But what I did notice is that like these people that live on like $1 a day, they had more joy because they experienced the Lord every single day and they recognized him. Your other piece of advice about going somewhere where it's quiet, turning off the TV and the noise in my life and the different voices and just being alone with the Lord, sometimes that's the scariest place for me, because I know that if I'm willing to go somewhere where it's quiet, I know you like to go hunting. Craig likes to go take walks in the woods. For me, it's cutting the lawn. Every time I cut the lawn, where I'm just like, okay, Lord, you talk. I feel like he says things, and I don't hear like your voice, but I hear it in my heart. I hear things that, like, for no reason, Mike, you need to pick up the phone and call this person, and you owe them an apology. Right? Or Mike, you should do this for so-and-so, or you were wrong. Usually it's about I'm wrong. So there's a consistent theme there, right? But sometimes it is going to do things. And to your, like, you never know what the Lord's going to do when you say, here I am. When we went to Africa in 2007, I went there because nobody in my family had ever left the country, as far as I know, except for, I think my uncle went to Vietnam. But nobody else had traveled. And my wife had this heart for missions and wanted to go to Africa, but she was a little nervous about going. And I was like, well, I'm going to be the superhero. I'm like, I'm going to go with you to Africa. Right. And so we did. We took the step of faith. We went to Malawi. We served there for a couple of weeks. Completely humbled me. I mean, like, you could not be more changed, like, in thought process than 2 weeks in Malawi. But that wasn't even the end of the story. because before I went, I was not having any more kids. I was like, nope, not going to do it. And when I came back, my oldest daughter came down the stairs one day, and she said, Dad, when are we having more kids? And I was like, I don't know, but I think it's going to be soon. Literally, the Lord had changed my heart from a man, and I was like 30 something years old, and I was like never having kids. And now we have two more. And I think, I know that was a Lord moment. I know also, like when I met my wife and I knew I was going to marry her, I was like, this is who I'm supposed to marry. I knew it. And I that was not a scriptural one. That was like, those were both like, the first one was a counsel. Like, let me talk to some people and let me see, because I just met her and she might get away if I wait too long. But the other one was clearly one of those, like, no thought. I didn't think through it. I literally just said, the Lord said, do it. And I'm going to say yes. And I couldn't be more blessed by having those children in our lives.
Yeah. I had almost a very similar, but opposite experience with Amy, my wife. So when I met her, I mean, I knew right away, this is the woman that I want to take a chance on for the rest of my life. I knew it within our first 4-hour conversation, because we talked about God for about 2.5 of those 4 hours right off the bat. Mm-hmm. Then when it got to the point where it's like, all right, well, it's time to really make the decision, all in, exclusive, this and that. And she told me that she couldn't have any more kids. And I had always believed that God had done the transformation inside me that he did in order to give it away. And I was most excited to give it away to my son or my daughter and my wife. And then to find out, she had a son and a daughter. I think they were 12 and 14 or 13 and 15. So, I mean, I had missed a good chunk. But the crazy thing was, I knew the answer before I even asked the question. Mm-hmm. Because I was that a cod with her already.
Love it.
And, both of the kids call me dad from time to time. And there's nothing off limits, especially with my daughter. I mean, we go everywhere in conversations.
Love it.
And I don't see how I could love them any differently. Like, I call them my kids, and I will love them like they were my own.
That's awesome. Well, speaking of Amy, she just asked a question in the chat, and that's where we're going to close. Yeah. And it's not what's for dinner tonight. It's what's the difference between knowing God and having a personal relationship with him?
She loves that. We talk about that a lot. So when I'm talking to guys about this, I always use kind of the same analogy. Like, all right, I could tell you a guy's full name. I could tell you how many kids he has. I'll probably tell you his kid's name. I can tell you what his tax bracket is, what his favorite color tie is, right? I could just tell you a whole bunch about this stuff. And you would be like, wow, you really know this guy well. And I would say, well, it's the president, or it's Donald Trump, or I absolutely have no relationship with these guys whatsoever. I can tell you everything about him, but I don't know him. I don't know about him farting in his sleep, or I don't know about him having a weird laugh that's annoying or contagious, or the things that you really get to know about a person when you draw near, right? And I've always tried to hold myself accountable with my relationship with the Lord in that way. I mean, I could spend the next 20 years and read the Bible and tell you everything from a historical standpoint and know about him, know about the land, know about all this stuff. But that doesn't mean I really know who he is, how he talks to me, how he loves me. Me, not everybody else, me, And I think what we're talking about, this here I am, having that heart and that trust and that act of letting go and really placing yourself unreservedly into his care and protection and guidance. That's where you get to know someone. I mean, that's what I do with my wife. That's what I do with my kids. That's how intimacy is attained.
I think that's it right there. That the key is that it's daily, frequently, right? However it needs to be. If I only talk to my wife once a week or once a month, I wouldn't have that same intimacy, and the more I get, like, that's the one thing I long for on a daily basis is more time with my wife. And that's the same thing that I should have with the Lord. And that is the difference. Like, do we wake up in the morning? Do you want to know his will? My favorite quote from the pastor who led me to the Lord, he said to me at my ordination, he said, Mike, for 30 years, he's getting ready to retire. He said, for 30 years, I woke up every day and I said, Lord, bless me. And I said, and he goes, about 5 years ago, I realized I had been doing it wrong for 30 years. And I started to ask the Lord, make me a blessing to others. And suddenly, like, not that, he'd already done, I mean, to me, I'm eternally grateful for his service, but suddenly he saw things that he never saw before, how God was willing to work through him because he was saying, I'm all yours. I'll do whatever you want.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so true. I'll tell you, some of the guys that I was talking to today, one of the things they said is, how long has it been since you've had to make an apology or an amend to somebody in your life? Because I know me personally, if I go more than 2 weeks without having to go up to somebody and say I'm sorry for something and clean up something, I'm not looking hard enough. I'm just not that holy,
Right.
But that's the thing. And, you hear people in church sometimes talk about this count it all joy. Yeah. And I think there's a little misconception with some people, obviously not everybody, and I'm only looking at a small scope, but I've heard people who are grieving losses of loved ones, and they'll grab their face and literally be like, count it all joy, like, don't cry. And it's like, no, I think the count it all joy is in those moments of despair and grief and frustration and powerless, and that disfiguring from the spiritual fire of God. Is I count it all joy because I know when I come out the other side, I'm going to be much better for it, and therefore a much better tool for the Lord. That's what I'm counting it all, because I will never grow closer to God when everything is going my way. Just won't do it. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. Well, I think that's a great place for us to end tonight, leaving it in a place where we got to be a little uncomfortable. We have to be willing to recognize that it's not about our will, it's about his will, and being willing to be used by God to be a blessing to other people. And who knows what God wants to do. I personally believe that if the church today said, I wake up tomorrow morning and I am going to say, Lord, make me a blessing to somebody else, this world could be transformed. We need to be putting our faith into action a little bit more frequently, and we need to be more intentional about it. And Jason Berry did a great job last week sharing with us what can happen if one person says, here I am, Lord. So thank you so much, Ray. I'm going to be up there this weekend, Lord willing. And am I going to see you?
That's the plan, Stan.
Oh man, I love it. All right. So I get to come hang out with you guys, and I will be up there. And this week we're going to talk about restoring the image of God in our hearts, in our homes, and in our community. So I would appreciate it if you pray for me, because it's a day and a half till I start hitting the road, and I'm not completely done with the message yet. And I am definitely not as good as Daniel or Craig. So I just appreciate the prayers, brother.
Yeah, I'm excited, man. I know you'll kill it.
Yeah, well, we'll see. We'll see.